Hi everyone, welcome to the IoT Hero Show, my weekly showcase of thought leadership in the Internet of Things. My name is Tom Raftery, I'm the Global IoT Evangelist for SAP, and now, on with the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the IoT Hero Show. My name is Tom Raftery. I'm VP and Global IoT Evangelist for SAP. And with me on the show today, I have Rick Bullotta. Rick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, Tom. As you said, my name is Rick Bullotta. Long and kind of lurid history in and around the IoT. Started out in the manufacturing world, which we'll talk later is kind of the intranets of things. A lot of great learnings and technologies transfer there. Been on the software side of the business at companies like Wonderware. Started a company called Lighthammer, which eventually became SAP MII. And then in 2009, I started a company called ThingWorx, which is an IoT platform acquired by PTC in 2013 and fairly broadly used in the space. These days, I'm basically doing a lot of advisory work and some angel investing in and around the IoT emerging technologies like autonomous vehicles, robotics, and fun stuff like that.
Okay, so you've been in the IoT space for quite a while, Rick.
Yeah, before it was cool. I mean, in many ways, if you think about the industrial automation space as kind of a microcosm of the IoT, we had sensors, actuators, human interface, connection to other systems, very demanding and mission critical applications, of course. Then we saw the advent of wireless communications and IP networking and industrial operations. Well, real quickly, you started to realize that the learnings from that, the volumes of data, everything about it was the perfect precursor to what we think of as the IoT today. Which, by the way, I love to tell all the time, it's a rare kind of meme do-over if you think about it, right? The IoT 1.0 was RFID when Kevin Ashton coined the term. Yeah. That was more or less an abject failure in terms of its broad-based adoption. It kind of went dormant for a while and resurfaced as kind of what we all think of as the IoT today, ubiquitously connected things, as opposed to just that kind of ubiquitous identity. So anyway, it's I like to think that the IoT is more a continuum as opposed to a big kind of revelation or something radically new. It's applying a lot of stuff that we already we've had at our disposal for quite some time. Clearly, some new technologies always being added to the mix, but.
Yeah. I was visiting the Schneider Electric plant there back in 2014, and the CTO at the time said, this was September 2014. The CTO at the time said that it cost them, I think it was $2 to put a system on a chip. And he said, for that price, why wouldn't you put one on everything? So everything they manufactured in 2014 and from then forward has had a system on a chip built into it. So smarts and connectivity, the whole thing. And I mean, that was coming up on 2.5, 3 years ago. I mean, things have only gotten cheaper and smarter since then.
I think that's a great point, Tom, is, if you think about what were the impediments to adoption, there's two things. Cost, clearly, right? If we look at the early era of M2M, the original class of things that were connected, they tended to be expensive pieces of equipment, industrial equipment, MRIs. There was enough heft in the product value to justify the cost. And it wasn't just the cost of the hardware and technology embedded kind of it was really the whole stack cost. Communications, wireless communications is silly expensive for, and we'll talk about how that's changing. Basically every aspect of it was problematic. And then the second was the friction that it took to take an idea, hey, what can we do with this newfound connectivity, and turn it into software and a meaningful business application. And again, we're seeing some geometric improvements in the time and effort it takes to get those kind of systems pulled together.
Yeah. Now, the IoT is very broad term
Yep.
means a lot of things to a lot of people. Everything from the Philips Hue light bulbs that we find in people's homes and connected doorbells, right through to the kind of industrial automation stuff that you're referring to. And I wrote a blog post about this a couple of months back, where I tried to define the differences between IoT is kind of the overarching term, and then Industry 4.0 and IIoT. But I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that. And I put a question out on Twitter as well, asking for questions that I should ask you on this podcast. And it was Steve Romerman from Lone Star Analysis asked a similar thing. He said, to ask you the differences between consumer IoT and all the rest of the IoT, I guess.
Sure. Well, there's obviously a ton of even sub-segmentations beyond that. At a minimum, you mentioned Industry 4.0. I had a fun, friendly debate with someone the other day about, do you have to be on the internet to be on the Internet of Things? And the reality is, a sizable percentage of devices that can, particularly in the Industry 4.0 climate, need not be connected for cybersecurity, safety reasons. True. But that's the identical technologies, right? So that's kind of one big question. If you're just physically, how are you connecting? And then in terms of consumer versus kind of industrial or enterprise, I mean, I think at its core, it really comes down to what's the value? What's the return on investment? How are you creating value with that? There's some very well-known value props on the industrial side today. Things like improving service and equipment availability, reducing, service calls, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I think there's a new mindset now that's thinking about how can I tie in my broader-based digital transformation issues in my company or opportunities, trying to bring new services and products to market, transforming from selling products to selling outcomes and selling consumables, that rethinking how their businesses work. Again, very demonstrable ROI. Flip over to the other side, you look at a space like home automation that's, it's attracted a great deal of attention, a large M&A activity like what we saw with Nest. But by and large, it's been sort of like, I call it jewelry for the technorati. It's for the most part. I mean, I'll admit, my Amazon Echo is connected to my Philips Hue bulbs, but am I getting great utility out of that? I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell. So I think that's one element. The second is that if you look at kind of wearables, home health monitoring, those kinds of things, they're very simple and linear applications. They're not exploiting kind of that internetedness, that connectivity. If you look, again, we'll go back over on the industrial side, the concept of a factory connected to the energy network, the logistics network, the network of networks effect starts to really become transformational. Now, perhaps, there's been this vision on the consumer and home side that your home knows how to communicate with your EV, which knows how to communicate with your solar panels. And, well, seems like Mr. Musk has got a few of those check marks covered. But that concept of thinking about how to truly improve something, to change something. I think connected healthcare is actually going to get some real traction. Improving patient outcomes by post-discharge care, post-surgical care, elder care. I'd hate to see it happen in the climate of dehumanization, but I think there are some real benefits there. Ultimately, though, it comes down to this, value that can be created or captured relative to the cost.
I think you're absolutely right. And this was something I wrote about a while ago as well. And just on that point, actually, before I get around to what I wrote some time back, I read this morning that WebMD have integrated Apple's research kit with their app so that they can track and monitor pregnancy and improve the long-term stats around pregnancy and the health of pregnant women. So I thought that was a beautiful use case, very, very, very particular use case, but a beautiful one. And speaking to your point about healthcare, but on the value, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right, because if you look at, and we've mentioned Philips Hue light bulbs, for example, a Philips Hue light bulb probably retails for about $50. Whereas a standard LED bulb producing the same amount of light, probably around $5. So there's probably about a 10x difference, and that's not unusual for IoT smart home-like devices to get that kind of 10x difference. Now, if we deploy sensors on a train or on a plane or in some kind of industrial automation in some manufacturing facility, you get an immediate efficiency gain from the data. Typically, I mean, you have to deploy applications and analytics to get the data and to get the efficiencies. But when you do, you get the efficiencies. You don't get any efficiencies from deploying a smart light bulb or a smart doorbell. You don't get any savings. You're never going to get that 10x back. So I think until you get the likes of insurance companies or utilities maybe subsidizing the smart home devices in exchange for access to some of the data, I really don't see the smart home thing taking off, except, as you say, for people who like playing with tech toys.
Well, generically, I think one way we can look at it is unless you actually close the loop and do something, affect an outcome, right? Yeah. You're reducing peak energy usage, you're changing settings. Until, it's the proverbial sound of one hand clapping, right? It's great to have all the dashboards about which of your appliances are using more electricity, but are you going to do less laundry? Yeah. Probably not. Are you going to wash fewer dishes? Probably not. But I think maybe it's because we haven't thought big enough. We haven't thought ambitiously enough about how these technologies could transform the home, the commute, those kinds of things. So I'm confident that there's a lot of very bright and creative people out there who, particularly with the new generation of tools and technologies they have at their disposal, are going to crack that code. In the meantime, there's, as I said, there's a lot of these kind of very mundane. I mean, you think about simple things like pushing out software updates to equipment, right? Yeah. Well, it's a non-trivial thing to do, and it's safe and secure and at scale and those kinds. So these are the areas that people on the industrial side have been applying these technologies for diagnostics, and again, not sexy, but it pays the bills. And again, now we're seeing people doing much more ambitious things.
Yeah. So switching over to the industrial side of things,
Yep.
The shift from platforms to apps solutions is a thing we're
Sure.
seeing. For a while there, it was all about the platforms, and now, depending on which analyst report you read, there's anything from 300 to 500 different platforms to choose from. What's your take on that?
Well, I'll recall an interesting conversation I had in 2010 with a former SAP colleague who was doing something in the early IoT, and my business partner and I pitched him how we had the coolest new IoT application platform, and he just sort of chuckled. He said, "You're not a platform when you declare yourself a platform. You're a platform when the ecosystem and the community and customers declare you a platform." And that's absolutely true. I mean, you need a certain amount of market leverage and size. Thankfully, we were able to achieve that. But I guess the point is, of those 300 to 500, there's the ones that hit the relevance meter are probably under 30. Realistically, there's been a lot of money flow into the space. I mean, don't get me wrong. That for many of these solutions, they're kind of valuable tools for more of a solution provider, maybe in-house developed. So there's a lot of exciting stuff. There's some cool open source stuff going on. But ultimately, the platform and the tools approach is essential early on, right?
It comes down to the buyer, too. So the early buyers were more like a technology buyer.
Yeah.
Now we're starting to see more of a business buyer. business buyers don't want to buy Lego bricks and pieces and parts. They want to buy, the end result, the outcome. Yeah. And that shift to, a different class of buyers requires much more like, honestly, I'm very impressed with the kind of the Leonardo positioning of connected healthcare, connected this, connected assets. Yep. That's what the next generation of mainstream buyers is going to wrap their head around. Why I'm going to give you $10, you're going to give me $15 back. It's got to be a much more of a less a science experiment. The challenge, though, is unlike an application like procurement or HR, where you can package a vast majority of it up in fixed processes and software. When we get into the IoT, no two applications are identical, and so it's actually more this hybridization of an application and well-known, business processes and data models combined with a configurable platform that's the holy grail, right? So it's going back to that old, Jeffrey Moore, core and context thing, right? The innovation around those things. You want to buy the generic business processes out of the box, but you want that ability to innovate around the core. And that's, I think, where the exciting stuff's happening now and many companies, many businesses, particularly vendors, have a tough time straddling that fence, being a platform and app company. And similarly, I think it's a challenge in the implementation community right now. There's a dearth of expertise that knows how to kind of apply these technologies in these domains today. I joke all the time that the developer that was working on, mypetfood.com yesterday is now coding up something on a connected insulin pump. It kind of makes me nervous, but but anyway. So the platform app hybridization, again, configurable applications, very extensible applications are critical. And ultimately, that's just one of those other things that takes the whole friction out of the equation.
And how do buyers decide?
Oh, excellent question. I mean, again, you still have those two big classes of buyers. I'll go so far as to say three. There's the already know what they want. I need a solution for remote monitoring of my equipment in the field. Those kind of solutions, you can kind of competitively bid by budget. True innovation is more a development process, an ideation process. So they're more that kind of tools buyer. I think the next wave is going to be the same people that are used to buying enterprise software today, the head of quality, the head of service, the head of marketing. I mean, the people, we haven't even touched on things like smart read. When we talk about industrial, maybe we should be using enterprise, because there's other applications of this technology from an enterprise perspective that aren't really the industrial side, right? Smart retail is such a great example. Yep. So I guess it's going to be more of a case where a buyer, a salesperson wants to walk in with a much more of a solution portfolio as opposed to a tools portfolio. And that's easier for those buyers to consume. I'll be honest with you. One of the biggest challenges we faced at ThingWorx, and I think most vendors are facing, is how do you monetize? How do you license? What is the metric by which you, in an Internet of Things world, you charge your customer? You mentioned earlier, is that device a light bulb or a $25 million piece of mining equipment? What's a thing, right? It's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, and you're right. The pricing model is going to be weird. I mean, do you do a per seat license, a per transaction license? And enterprise companies are used to doing per seat. But if you're a utility company, are you going to suddenly have to pay licenses for every transformer you've got?
It's interesting. We found, your mileage may vary, but we found that when we sold about half of our revenues into the Industry 4.0 space, half of which we like to call the intranets of things. Mm-hmm. Half of the revenues were in the more broad, Internet of Things space. When we sold into the Industry 4.0 space, since most of the value creation was empowering people with better, more timely information and decision support. That per seat license, combined with other site models, things like that, seemed to fit well. When we went into the more general IoT side, it tended to fit better with kind of a hybrid of the number of devices and their chattiness. But at the end of the day, to be honest, they're all at scale. Those kind of deals at scale are all negotiated deals. They're just kind of like, and ultimately, perhaps it's a proportion of value delivered and value captured. It's really kind of the net in those situations.
So for the buyers, I think a lot of the chatter you're seeing online these days is talking about issues around security and privacy and hacks and Mirai and stuff like that. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, you don't want to be that first. You don't want to be that first industrial CEO who's on the head of the front page of the Wall Street Journal for some serious incident. No. And I guess I'll start with the one key observation I think we're really losing sight of is there are so many very talented professionals that grew out of industrial automation that have solved, mission critical problems where people, the environment, and physical equipment are at risk. We really need to learn and take a lot of those learnings into the broader IoT. Now, granted, the attack profile was different, but there was a trend, even early 2000s, there was a trend to connect your factories to the internet. I think, 2000, the 9/11 had a chilling effect on that. Cybersecurity issues around taking, for example, chemical plants off the network, so to speak. There's a shift now back. Again, the technologies that we have enable us to be somewhat more secure, but to be honest with you, a lot of these things are still air gapped today for critical safety reasons. I think that, so security is sort of a given. I mean, that's not a negotiable thing. Particularly the moment you transition from simple sensor to cloud to actuation, where you're now changing the physical world. That's not a 1x, 10x. That's a 100x to 1,000x expansion in criticality. So that's one element of it. The second is if we look at the data and the capabilities of these connected things, it's becoming a much more complex value chain. I use an example a lot of take a piece of farming equipment or construction equipment. Company A designed it, perhaps Company B manufactured it or some of its subcomponents. Company C sold it. Company D services it, or D, E, and F. Company G, H, and I operate it. Bottom line is the data generated by that equipment is of interest to many constituencies, and it needs to be in a very granular way. Healthcare, same thing. Patient data versus doctor data versus provider data versus pharma company. Thinking about how we provide not just the security and privacy to very granular data, but how do you manage that, right? It sounds silly, but the tools to administer that are very vexing, very challenging. So I guess ultimately I see two models. All of the consumer side tends to be almost wide open, right? I mean, it's not particularly difficult to get into most of these devices. Whereas a lot of industrial companies are erring on the side of, particularly in the Industry 4.0 space, kind of the extreme and keeping things very segmented.
Yeah, so and they have to. I mean, it isn't the well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression is it's not the danger of having your site taken offline, but more it's probably the danger of a hacker getting in and changing slightly the readings on devices so that they now require service, a little more often, that your costs go up, you become less competitive.
Well, a couple of it's great point. I used to use an example on the broader IoT. Imagine if you were able to spoof sensors in the Lincoln Tunnel, radiation, but that tunnel is so wired up right now. So by spoofing readings, you've shut down Lower Manhattan. What's the financial impact of that? It's substantial, right? Versus, and even a denial of service attack on a manufacturing plant floor in a chemical refinery could be disastrous, right? I mean, you're attempting to shut down and you can't shut. So the point is there are the most common kinds of vulnerabilities still need to be dealt with. But the misinformation one is an interesting one because one of the big gaps today in the IoT, in my opinion, is lack of reliable digital identity. I don't really know that thing A is truly thing A. That's probably one of the interesting benefits, believe it or not, in the cellular world, you have a SIM. In theory, a SIM is a reliable digital ID, a place for secure storage. Yet today, only about 1.5% of connected things are connected cellularly. So now we have the vast majority of connected devices don't have that at their disposal. So the question is, why don't we find a way to, implement something similar for these connected devices? But so digital identity, back to your core point, it's a multi-dimensional problem. It involves digital identity, security, privacy. They're all kind of, it's a Venn diagram of many interconnected areas.
We're coming towards the end of the podcast here, Rick. But for people who are, let's throw two questions at you and in one. First off, long-term vision for IoT, where will it be in 10 years' time? And second question is, if people want to read up more about this, about IoT, IIoT, Industry 4.0, where's a good place to go?
Sure. Well, we'll take the second one first. I mean, there's just a wealth of information online. I wouldn't even point to any specific sources. It's the old, what's that website? Let me Google that for you. But I mean, obviously there's a lot of vendor white papers. I think it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of what people have actually done, not necessarily just the tools, but to look at the way people have been applying it. So use cases, those kinds of stories, I think, are more stimulating to how to apply it. So maybe, that would probably be a good place to start. And then you can figure out what the right technologies, and technology, honestly, is no longer the problem. It's a complete non-issue.
Agreed.
Then in terms of where things go, you and I were talking before the call a little bit that the IoT really is a continuum. It's not this big disruptive. I know it's being pitched that way, but in reality, it's a very evolutionary growth of a lot of sensing technology, control technology, connectivity technology, data. Big data is a great. I mean, you look at companies like OSI Soft have been doing big data for decades at volumes that people almost unimaginable, right? And to think they were able to achieve that with the technology at the time is just impressive.
Yeah.
But my point is that a lot of these things, now we have some incredible assets with machine learning and other technologies to help us harness that data. My point is that I think it's not going to be this giant step change difference, between now and 10 years. What I really hope we see is that much more out of the box applications and solutions. I think we'll see the overall cost come down dramatically. It's still too expensive to connect a lot of products. But most importantly, I hope that the whole tooling, technologies, techniques, the building blocks that we have lead to applications and uses we've never seen before. Just sort of that, so that I don't see the technologies being disrupted and changing dramatically, but I'm very optimistic and confident that the bright people on this planet will figure out ways to apply them to solve real problems and solve, let's face it, there's a lot of very important challenges we face in healthcare and sustainability and so on. I'd love to see the world's best and brightest working on those kinds of problems with these technologies. That would be a perfect outcome.
Couldn't agree more. Fantastic. Rick, if people want to know more about you or follow you on Twitter or LinkedIn, or where's the best place to go?
Yeah, at Rick Bullotta. Also Rick Bullotta on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, as I said, a lot of what I'm doing these days is working with startups in and around the IoT, dabbling a little bit with some kind of the emerging technology stuff. So if you're, if you've got some ideas for the next big thing, always willing to listen.
Oh, tremendous, tremendous. Great. Rick, that's been fantastic. Thanks a million for coming on the show today.
Tom, my pleasure. Take care.